Yeah, that's the announcement. So I'm Miranda Matthews. I'm head of Centre for Arts and Learning, and I'm delighted to have with us Sudip Chakroborthy from TheatrEX and colleagues, Hanee and Raufur, who have all travelled from Bangladesh. And this event is kindly supported by Goldsmiths, the Official Development Assistance Fund, but also by the British Council in Bangladesh to enable a larger group of TheatrEX practitioners to visit us and to develop contacts on their visit to the UK. So with us today, we also have Dr. Amanda Kipling, and she's going to present her research. And our collective umbrella title for this event is Theatre for Embodied Critical Consciousness. This year, Centre for Arts and Learning has a theme of known and unknown. So we're exploring in this event how projects that we've created, research that we're working on, is connecting with this sense of enlivening consciousness, of awakening consciousness and awareness, and particularly of issues that are really difficult in society, difficult to encounter, emotional, needing kind of sensitive engagement, development of empathy, such as climate change. That's the focus of our Theatre for Climate Justice Education in Bangladesh project. So as I said, I'm delighted that everybody is here, and I will now hand over to Sudip. Sudip, are you ready to come to the stage? And we have a film that's been created in our collaborative project. So we are going to show this to you now. It's would you like to say a bit more about the film, Sudip, in terms of...
We have everything described in the film, so, so it's better if you can see it first and then we can discuss afterwards.
Sure. So I'll just give a couple of sentences introduction to say that with our official development assistance funding, Sudip worked in 3 locations in Bangladesh with a wide range of practitioners and participants, aiming towards inclusivity of every kind. And the outcomes of those 3 workshops that Sudip and colleagues did are a number of films. There's more than 3 films, aren't there, Sudip? So
16. It's 1 film, but 16 stories.
Okay, 1 film, but 16 stories, which we're going to screen for you now, all being well.
31 minutes. Make the Zoom connection off. Yeah.
মাঠে পুকুরও নাই 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 এখন তো গাছও না এখন তো শান্তিও নাই শান্তি না শান্তি নদী নদী উড়ে গেছে চিল
So did you share just the
সব শেষ হয়ে গেছে ঠিক আছে নিজের ক্ষতি করছি আমরা সাথে প্রজন্মের
এসেছি আমি আরো শক্তিশালী হয়েছি অমর তোমাদেরই কাজে চলো চলো সহচরী গাছ লাগাই তাড়াতাড়ি কি
গাছ লাগাই তাড়াতাড়ি চলো চলো সহচরী গাছ লাগাই তাড়াতাড়ি চলো চলো সহচরী গাছ লাগাই তাড়াতাড়ি
ময়লা আবর্জনা ফেলি নির্দিষ্ট স্থানে পরিবেশের ক্ষতি হয় পৃথিবী রুষ্ট হয় হীন কাজ না করি এই জন্মে কি হীন কাজ না করি এই জন্মে একটা সুন্দর পৃথিবী আমরাই জাগাবো একটা পৃথিবী আমাদেরই জাগাতে হবে একটা সুন্দর পৃথিবী আমরা জাগাবো জাগাবোই একটা সুন্দর পৃথিবী আমরা জাগাবো জাগাবোই কি একটা সুন্দর পৃথিবী আমাদেরই জাগাতে হবে বাচ্চারা শোনো পৃথিবীটা আমাদের পৃথিবীটা সবার পৃথিবীটা সর্বপ্রাণের
হিল বাবা হিল মতিঝিল 500 টাকার বান্ডল টাকা টাকা টাকা
সমাজের আবর্জনা আইয়া পড়ছে
হ্যাঁ
খাও 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 খাও
গাছ কেটে বানাচ্ছে বাড়ি কাক আমাদের সাথে করছে আরি
কিসের আরি টাকা হবে কারি কারে কোথায় টাকা গাছে টাকা কোথায় টাকা নদীতে টাকা আরে টাকাই টাকা
ইস 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 সব কিছুই যে বিষ
বিষ বিষ বিষ আমিও ময়লা ফেললাম তুমিও ময়লা ফেললে কেউ কি পরিষ্কার করলা
কা কা কলা কলা কা কা
খাও খাও
কা কা
খাও খাও
কা কা
খাও খাও
কা কা
খাও খাও আরে প্লাস্টিক খাইয়া ওগল কাউয়া আর কুত্তা মুইরা সাফ হইয়া গেছে ওদের কেউ আইয়া আর দেখলো না din din da da din din da na din din da da din din da din din da da din din da na din din da da din din da din din da da din din da na din din da da din din da din din da da din din da na din din da da din din da da ta the ta ta the a the ta ta the the ta the ta the 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 ta ta dha dhin dhin dha dha dhin dhin dha na tin tin ta ta dhin dhin dha da takite thikite taka takite thikite ghene 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 dha na tin tin ta ta dhin dhin dha 5 6 7 ধারা তুঙ্গা ধাগে দিগে ধা ধা দিগা দিগা দিগে ধা তাক্কা তুঙ্গা তাকিকে টাকা তা ধা থেকে টাকা দিগে 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 ধারা তুঙ্গা ধাগে দিগে ধা ধা দিগা দিগা দিগে ধা তাক্কা তুঙ্গা তাকিকে টাকা তা ধা থেকে টাকা দিগে 1 2 3 4 5 6 7
ॐ
So we're going to now have a space where we actually go on to our next speaker, and please hold your questions for the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Amanda Kipling now.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you very much, Sudip and TheatrEX. Let's get my... And I'll go to the presentation mode as well. That one. Just while Miranda's helping me sort out the technology, I feel quite awkward following such a beautiful half-hour's feast of the most wonderful cultural celebrations and art forms. I'm afraid the next half hour is going to be me talking. Hopefully the slides will be engaging. There we are. Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you very much, Sudip. I've recently passed my doctorate, and so I'm sharing a little bit of that piece of work with you here this evening. And I'm focusing on a tiny concept called the gaze, which I think drama people will be familiar with. What actually happens when I gaze at you and you gaze back at me, and what do we learn? And what do we learn from them? So this piece of research lends itself quite nicely to the theme of known and unknown, because I'm going to be telling you a little bit of a narrative of a student who actually got in touch with me out of the blue on social media and told me about some of her memories from her drama lessons from when I taught her. And that actually spurred, helped shape the actual question for my doctoral study. So I'm just calling this bit the gaze, and we're only looking at a tiny bit of the actual study. I'm not going to try and capture it all in one go. So the question is, what actually happens when we think in role? When we actually go into role as another person? What happens to our thinking? What happens to the way we perceive our world when we do that? So that was the big question. And something that Chiara said in her social media message to me was, oh, I remember my drama lessons. They helped me escape my reality and face it at the same time. Now, for somebody seeking a question for their doctoral studies, who's always been interested in what happens in the enroll process, that was my gift. And it came through social media after about 25 years of not having seen this student. It just landed on my screen like that. And hence the lightning image there. And that came to me in 2019. It's taken a while to complete the doctorate. I'm concentrating on 3 practitioners for this study to help me. One was Stanislavski, who drama specialists will be aware of, who is the specialist who attempted for the very first time to write down a guide for what it is to be an actor, what it is an actor has to do to be successful in their craft, to actually assume the role of somebody else, be absolutely authentic and convincing in that, and actually take an audience with them into that world and convince them that they're actually somewhere else. And I'll be touching on some of his basic principles in a minute. I'm then moving on to Merleau-Ponty, who's perhaps a little less well known as a phenomenologist. You know, oh, excellent, great guy. Merleau-Ponty and his ideas about the body and how it is a site of learning and how that operates. I did quite a lot more work on his theories in the actual doctorate, but I'm only going to touch on some basic ones here today. And also I was helped out a little bit by Lacan, who who's one or two of his concepts actually helped crystallize some of the rest of my theoretical development. So Stanislavski, in a nutshell, was saying that concentrated a lot on on awareness of the actor. You have to be very aware of yourself at a very heightened level. You have to have this heightened awareness about the role that you are playing. You have to have a heightened awareness of the other person on stage doing the same thing on both levels. And you have to take the audience with you. So before you go anywhere else, we can see the value of educational drama on the curriculum in a school when you're actually having to work in those double dimensions, in multiple dimensions, as self and other. Yeah, so that's a gross oversimplification, but it just gives you a flavour of what Stanislavskian theory is about. And he calls this, when you've managed to actually take an audience with you, that is what he would call communion. And as you do this, every time you adapt a role, you're supposed to find something inside you which identifies with that character. So if I'm playing Queen Victoria and I do some reading and a bit of research, there might be something that I latched onto that related to me, and then I try and grow it from there. And that's where what he would call soul extension, which might sound a little bit spiritual at this point, but you'll see that that's no accident in a minute. In fact, I don't know if any of you saw the interview with Helen Mirren talking about her playing Queen Elizabeth. And she said she went through so many documents and so many photographs. And there was one photograph that clinched it for her. And that was when Princess Elizabeth was very small. She must have been about 7, meeting a dignitary. And she's shaking his hand like that. And that for her resonated something for her. And she grew the character from there. Merleau-Ponty talks about us having a body schema. As a site of learning, we have a body schema, and that every time we learn something properly, I'm not talking about superficial recall, when we really learn something, our body schema reassembles itself so it becomes a vital part of that. It's not about bolt-on extras, which I think a lot of us see and understand as a flaw of our system at the moment. A lot of it is superficial learning and remembering for a test, without it really properly becoming a part of you as a learner in the most holistic sense. And later on, I'll tell you a little bit more about bodily reciprocity, which is where your body's telling me something and my body's telling you something. And you just know, your body tells you something about the other person and how they're feeling without words getting in the way or any of the symbolic languages cluttering the process up. And he then talks about the body past, the body present, and the body future, which we'll come on to in a little bit more detail later on. And then Lacan, some of you may have heard of Lacan. His most famous theory, the one that people can latch on to, is the mirror stage, which is where a baby looks in a mirror and for the first time sees a reflection and thinks, and perceives that as me, but not me. And I think we can instantly see the inferences here for drama about when we're playing a part that's not us, but is us at the same time. Are these strands beginning to knit together a little bit here? And he also talks a lot about how society actually bounces messages onto us and tells us what our identity is, and how that mirror stage, the reflection you get from the mirror, is just one message, but you're getting them bounced off your parents, off your environment, off your siblings, off school, through society, actually telling you what you are. And so ironically, I arrive at drama actually being, rather than a process of you becoming somebody else, it's more a by doing that, actually discovering who you are, that the role that we have, what we appear to be, the self that we project, is actually a role that's been dictated to us, and the real self is actually released in drama rather than the reverse. I'm hoping this will work. I've got a recording here. If not, I can read it to you so we have a safety net. This is Chiara, who was interviewed. I went up to Scotland to see Chiara. I taught her in southeast London. Of course, she's the one student that ended up living miles away. So I had to go up to Scotland to visit her, and it was such a joy. And she actually was talking about one of her drama lessons, which actually I had no recollection of. I know I had done this lesson before, but I didn't remember the specific one.
I can't remember what the lesson was at drama, but we'd done something and we had to get into each other's roles. But one person had to be me and I had to be them, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but all of us had to be somebody else. Mm-hmm. And when I was seeing this person acting me, I thought that's not me. I don't like that. Really? Surely that's not me. Yeah, and I didn't like that very much. And I started to change my ways and my ways of thinking of how I was going to get past that. I didn't like that person.
Quite profound happening there in that simple exercise. Those of you who've done some Stanislavskian practice might be familiar with it, where you actually have to observe somebody very, very closely, and you're not doing an impression of them. You're trying to get inside them, not just physically copy, but actually capture an essence of them. And she sees this student do this, and she says, surely that's not me, but you could tell she knew it was. And just before that, she said, I was on the verge of going completely off the rails at that point. And she thought it was something that she'd kept hidden. But when she saw that student do that, she realized that everybody else could see it as well, that the genie was out of the bottle, and she was going to have to work hard to pull that back in. So a really revealing moment there. Is this not? Yeah. So I'm just going to take us back a little bit to the concept of metaxis, which is apparently correctly should be termed methexis. You might see both those terms. And this is a space between us and the gods, going right back to classical spirituality here now. And as we aspire to actually elevate ourselves beyond the here and now, that we start to reach towards higher levels of being. Now, of course, reaching the gods is something that we can't do, but we should be aspiring to be moving away from the here and now. And this has links with what Stanislavski was talking about, soul extension. Actually, the more you can enrich yourself by spiritually expanding your experience and your thinking, that you are going to obviously be a more versatile actor. But that was where he was going. But it's got links here as well with deeper levels of learning, I think, especially for the classroom. And so we develop ourselves through empathy, and we become more worldly. So a lot of drama classes have you're at the post office and the person in front of you has just pushed in. What do you do? That's quite close to the here and now, and that might well have happened in your lifetime. But then you gradually get to the point where you're Queen Victoria, or you're somebody who's got to go over the top in the trenches in the First World War. And you can see that the person who becomes the really talented actor is somebody who can actually do this with just about any person that's ever existed, find something to latch onto and to expand through there. And Vygotsky talks about when we do this, when we enter into the not, what I call the not here and the not now, we haven't got enough of ourselves to actually do that. And we develop a fictitious I. I don't know whether you've heard of that term. So it's like a shadow self that takes the overflow, that actually goes into role and exists in the fiction and can work at it from there. Whereas if we're stuck in the here and now, we might be limited to how we do that. And my extended thinking on this is that we can go into the unknown. We can go into the unknown as ourselves with the accompanying fictitious I, or the role, as we might want to call being in role, and go into really quite frightening examples. You could tell that gave her a shock, that experience, yeah? That we can do that while we're in role, that it protects us, that we can actually feel the fear but not be harmed by it, take the blows, which is what she did, and return with newfound wisdom to the here and now. And that's a really lovely example of, teachers could have told her that 1,000 times over. You're not going to get your GCSEs. You're going nowhere if you carry on like this. Do you realise what will happen if you don't? Blah, blah, blah. But the moment you're in a role situation, she was open to that. She had surrendered herself to the gaze, and she was, I wonder whether she was so busy gazing at somebody else that she didn't realise that somebody was gazing at her. So low was her self-worth at the time that that was possible. That actually somebody stopped and looked and really studied her to the point where they could reflect back that different mirror stage that she's getting at the age of about 12 at that point. A second chance. Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology is a search for essences. I've mentioned essences already, and Stanislavski, you can see that they're beginning to link together. These unusual bedfellows actually say very similar things. And Merleau-Ponty says, we must not wonder whether we perceive a world that's out there, then we've got to try and gobble it up somehow to learn about it, but we must instead say the world is what we perceive. Our world is what we actually perceive. And so it lends even more weight to Stanislavski's idea about this extending the soul and extending your perception of the world, because your world will get bigger by doing so. And Merleau-Ponty says there's more to the world than we can actually perceive, and we might have to make guesses at some of it. Well, what better place to do that than in a drama classroom? It's a hand-in-glove fit for developing ourselves in the way we think. And he also says that perception is not presumed true, but defined as access to truth. And I think already I've covered through the Stanislavskian theory, this idea of being in role as an access, as a pathway to another truth is quite important. And in a sense, it's Dorothy Heskett said, ironically, in order to find a truth in a drama situation, we have to engage in a lie. But the truth in it lies in the fact that the class actually all agrees to the fiction. We agree to surrender to the fiction and that there is a truth within that. And he also says, which is interesting, that our whole world is just representations. And we've met this already with the mirror stage, just representations. And therefore, they are always there to be adapted, changed, added to, extended. If we think of our world as a mixture of representations, thinking becomes a different process. I mentioned the body schema before, and he says we have a habit body. So there are things that we do as a ritual that we carry on every day. We get up, we go to the toilet, we brush our teeth, we go off to work, we catch a bus. There's habits that we get into, and there are habits of thinking that get carried along with that. And the habit body is capable of outreach. And every time it does that, the body schema gets rearranged when something is learnt. Consequently, the body is a grouping of lived through meanings. And if you start seeing a drama lesson like that, you start thinking educationally very, very differently as a practitioner in a classroom. And you must remember that in a drama classroom, it's not just you that's going through this, it's your role as well. So it's happening on two levels. There are two selves involved. And so this whole process is doubled at least. And then you've got to think about the fact that there might be 30 other students involved as well. Can you imagine what's happening to the world of representation? You become this very, very mixed up kaleidoscopic world that you're all in, and quite at ease with the fact that everything's changing all around you all the time. Whereas in reality, that becomes a bit of a nightmare. When I don't know if any of you have ever had the misfortune of witnessing a really nasty accident or a close shave. Let's imagine you see somebody stumbling down some stairs. They manage to rescue themselves in time. What actually happens to our body when we see that? Yeah, exactly. Your body will jump. Yeah, your heart will miss a beat. You get and you gasp your breath, and your body tells you. You don't think, "Good heavens, that person's just had. I'm going to gasp. I'm going to make my heart miss a beat." You don't. The brain doesn't tell the body to do that. The body tells the brain, and we accept this with babies, that through the senses that they learn through their environment, that somehow around about the age of about 2, it's all about us telling the brain, telling what the body to do. And it's one of the areas of research is that we don't do enough of this as adults. And so when you see fear or sense tension or upset or even laughter, and did anybody else almost shed a tear when you saw that beautiful, yeah, exactly. And your body did it. You didn't think, "Oh, that's moving, therefore I think I'll join in with a bit of crying." It was a bodily reaction to what happened there. And we don't harvest this nearly enough, especially in adult education, and not really sufficiently, I would argue, in schools. So I'm arguing for something called phantom theatre, which is coming back to Merleau-Ponty's thoughts. He did a lot of work with the so-called insane in order to understand us, who we like to think are sane, people who develop phantom limbs. And he says, it was the body telling the brain that there was a third arm, actually. But let's reverse this thinking a little bit. And I'm wondering if perhaps when we go into role, this fictitious I is almost an entire phantom self, and that we work in phantom theatre at that point, because that incorporates everybody else as well. And the habit body, which is what we do all the time, he describes it as it being difficult you've got a bad running style, and it's very difficult to correct an embedded bad running style. But if you can project your body into another world, as you do in drama and dance, and didn't we see some fabulous examples of that in the previous presentation, that actually that is what opens the doors up to everything else, that it actually enables the body to experience differently. And the trick is, I think, for an educationalist is, having had that, don't leave it in the phantom theatre. You've got to try and bring it back with you into the here and now. And that's the skilled bit, which is often, I would argue, not done particularly effectively. And so we can incorporate the past into the present and weld it into the future. And couldn't we see all that happening in that lovely example from Chiara? In a moment, all that was happening in that moment of really pure theatre in a drama classroom. And so, as Cecily O'Neill says, when you're in a drama experience, you are actually in the process of becoming. So I've mentioned Lacan's mirror stage already. He says that our representations are made up of significations and their signifiers. And he maintains that when you're in a situation like this, where you're moving into the imagination, that they become separated. So we're back to that crazy kaleidoscopic world that we can navigate. And thank you. And where everything's up for grabs. And if you're familiar with drama classrooms, you will see students try ideas out, and either the group will pick them up and run with them, or they'll get dropped, but that's all right. And if they've put their hand up in a discussion in a lesson, if the idea is not accepted, somehow that's terrible shame. But the art form means that's all right. We can try this, we can try that. Let's see if that might work for a few minutes. If not, we'll move on to something else. And then there'll be an energy that takes the whole group off. And they're quite used to letting things drop in pursuit of the thing, the energy that creative process will actually produce. And Lacan maintains, and this is what's bringing me back to this whole thing about transformation, and what we saw her talking about there, is that it's by allowing that mixture to happen and not happen, and collide and conflict and match and pair and dance, that curing, or what I prefer to call healing, can take place. One more slide. So the experience, the I and the you, in a symbiosis of a performed story and the social relations in which identities are materially embedded. I thought that was quite a useful one for people to know if you're looking at doing ethnography. That's quite a useful one, ethnography for creative subject areas. And didn't we see a great example of Chiara agreeing to surrender myself to the spectacle, and look what she got from it. Her life transformed from that moment onwards. In the end, she gets on that stage and she dances to a Spice Girls number. And she said, as she stepped up onto that stage, the last thing she did at school, they're going to remember me for this. Dancer, beautiful, proud, self-determining young woman, instead of somebody who was about to go off the rails.
So thanks to our presenters and to Amanda. We have some people in our audience who are fasting currently, and we do encourage people in our audience to come and get food at the front. It's for you. And thanks everybody. I'm aware that some people online may also be fasting. Please do what you need to do. We have another 12 minutes of our session, which would usually be put to questions. And so if we have any questions from the audience, that would be wonderful. So just to kind of bring us together on this, in that our focus is on theatre for embodied critical consciousness. So we're really kind of thinking about those key words, embodied, critical, and consciousness, in connecting with our presentations today. So firstly, the films from Sudip and TheatrEX have brought to us the embodiment of emotive and affective connection with experiences in Bangladesh, and the frustrations of dealing with things like enforced migration and deforestation and rising sea levels and poverty and plastic waste. And you've seen probably the start of those films. There were brief slides and titles which helped people to focus in on what those performances were about. But there may be things that cropped up in those performances that you want to ask about, because they weren't spoken. There was, except for the puppets, where we had some subtitles. And the other performances were more about expression with emotive expression, with emotive expression with the body. They were really inclusive, weren't they, Sudip? So we aim to bring in as many people with visible and invisible disabilities as possible in the kind of collective groups, the theatre groups that you connected with. So that inclusivity is part of our, let's say, a post-human view of what embodiment is, in that it's not the, although one of the actresses you said was Miss Bangladesh. So there is that sense of mixing acceptance and acceptability of all different body kinds and all different ways of embodiment, and presenting what it means to react to these situations. Would you like to say something about that, Sudip?
It's very important and interesting work we did because of this practice research project. We had this opportunity to invite people from different diverse backgrounds, including people with disabilities and visually impaired, and abilities and diverse backgrounds from different socio-economical backgrounds. So everyone has to say, and they said, and we collected this saying together, and then we portrayed through theatrical performances. Because of this moving and traveling, we filmed these performances, and we edited. End of this whole presentation, we filmed it in 30 minutes, but there was 16 different stories, and people coming together from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and diverse locations, from Sylhet, from Nabiganj, and from Dhaka. And most of them, if I say, are the victim of this globalization, of this global, rising sea levels and warming and migration and poverty and many other things. And definitely the focus, if I focus on this, is the people, mostly in Nabiganj, most of the people are from flood affected areas. And some of them in Dhaka, they're also flood affected. So, and some of them are living in high-rise buildings. And some of them had no experience of flood effect directly, but they had the experience of climate changes. So we came together and we said, and we collected these old stories, and almost more than 200 stories came into this in the workshops, in 3 different workshops, in 3 different locations, and each location has 25 people participated, young people and different backgrounds people, different ages people. And altogether 75 participants were there, 5 practitioners, 2 research assistants, and 1 workshop designer. So altogether we came here, and if I say the people from technical support and other areas and people invisible, we don't name them, but they're from different backgrounds and different abilities and different efforts. Altogether more than 300 people came together in this practice research project. Some of them are just, they gave us their access, and they gave they supported us, and they gave this opportunity to work with them and the family members and others. So they supported us in this whole project for last 3 months. And 2 of my colleagues are here, Prithish, Raufur, Rahim, and Ummey, Hanee. They also supported this. They were on the board. So we did the work for last 3 months actively, and before that we wrote this proposal and submitted the proposal for last and another 3 months. So almost 6 to 7 months we are in it. And last of all, we said this about what we wanted to say. Thank you. And one more important thing is, it's not about Bangladesh. I think most of the coastal areas of the world are affected by this global warming, and it's only 0.56% are emissions, carbon emissions are produced in Bangladesh, but rest of them are produced in first world countries. So they produces, and this is the result of these productions are unbearable. And the people, the countries like Bangladesh, the coastal areas and the deltas are suffering. because of this carbon emissions and global warming and things. So we said not only about us, but also about the people who are suffering. So it's a collective voice, the representation of collective voice. Yes.
Just thinking what you're saying, should it there around a line from something Amanda said around being in role is a pathway to another truth, which seemed to really resonate with this sense of embodied critical consciousness, because you're taking on this criticality around what your experience of truth is and how it might be perceived differently in someone else's shoes. Is that relevant, do you think, Amanda?
Yes, I think so. I think there's some parallels there actually. That we're looking at what we're doing to the environment, but what is all that actually doing to us as well? The way that we're eroding ourselves. Got that external, but there's an internal erosion going on at the same time. And that actually there's quite a lot of thinking now about how we've fallen into this habit of thinking, in dualities about mind and body, and that those being separate, and that really there's quite a call, I think, for this spiritual reuniting of these dichotomies and looking at things much more holistically than perhaps we've done before. It's sort of the planet versus money and today versus tomorrow, and thinking about Chiara, in a sense, she's a little motif for what happens here. All the bad signals that had been sent to her through her circumstances, socially and economically, had told her that she was this no-hoper, in some ways. And she'd taken that on. And in fact, she's blossomed and flourished as a woman, a young woman in her own right now. And, what you're talking about, the environment, that is part of it. The actual physical environment tells you the same sort of thing. It contributes to that. So I think there were some real parallels that were going on within the individual, being a microcosm of what's happening to the world.
So, would you like to share something, Rahim and Hanee?
We do have a few minutes left. It would be nice to hear some voices in the room.
If you have any
If
question.
you have any comments to make, thank you. Yeah.
Well, just an observation. First of all, great to meet Sudip. Looks like we're both villagers from the same districts of Bangladesh.
Oh, really? Amazing.
But I was in Bangladesh for 4 months last year.
Yeah.
What I noticed was that as there's more disposable income, you'll have more affluence. The need to buy things and throw it away. Quite saddening. Once it's at times I had to kind of, every time we went to them, I had to remind my family about not throwing things. So there's a particular film with the rubbish in front. So I had to politely remind my family that please don't throw the bottle out the car because it annoys me. But so you kind of found your kind of typical British English person coming out, not lecturing them, but at the same time trying to say that all 10 of us throw a bottle out the window when we're in a car, makes it 10 times worse. And they were just, and because people just years ago, you'd noted that you didn't buy so many things from the shop. Now you're buying crisps and sweets and Coke. People buy that and just thrown on the floor, and you think, no one's picking it up. Okay. So there was a link between the more we have and the less responsibility we take. My view is in terms of, because we've got the money, and there is a very good for Bangladesh, a middle income, disposable income, people have become more affluent. But I noticed that when I used to go to Bangladesh years ago as a kid, the villages are really nice and neat, the towns and cities horrible. There just seems to be a lack of civic pride and civic trust amongst each other. I think in a village you can admonish someone and tell someone off, don't do that because you're part of a smaller group. In the towns and cities, I think there's a bit where you said you get lost. And that I found quite sad. And on one occasion I had to make my 6 nieces, took on a date, I had to ask them to carry the bottles back to our townhouse. So they were quite upset with me, quite grumpy that his uncle telling us to carry the bottles for 10 minutes. I said, no, we can't, there's 7 of us. We can't throw our bottles on the road because that makes it worse. I think when we got back to our townhouse, they were quite indignant and telling my cousins, oh, he was really bad. And I said, no, there's a reason we have to do that, because you imagine the amount of people that live in this town, if we all did that, if we all took a day just to bring it back. So I'm hoping some of that kind of kicks in, but there is a link between what you said earlier on and how people see that. And there's less of, I found, my own narrow way, less of a kind of civic view and pride amongst ourselves as Bangladeshis. That's me as a kind of British person having that lens, but not trying to lecture them. At the same time, I found that everything you put in that video was, it took me back to the 4 months I spent there, just kind of reminiscing and kind of really loved everything about it and seeing me, but it's all true. It's very, very true. Within Bangladesh on its own, it can't do that for itself. Other countries, and also we from the West have to decide how we buy things, where we buy things, ethical spending and sustainability. It all goes hand in hand. So if you're going to buy stuff from a retailer, ask yourself, do I need this?
Yeah, good thinking. Yeah, and
I think people are here waiting. I think you can say goodbye to them. If they have question or any question from the live audience, I think they can't hear us.
or they can't hear.
So you can say.
So they haven't, that was earlier on, and they said they can't hear. I haven't heard recently if you had seen another message. But so hopefully we still have our online audience that can hear. And thank you so much for attending. We're at time now, and we may continue our discussion in the room, but I feel appropriate for us to close our event online at least now, so that people in the room can come and share some of the things that we have here and continue the discussions or do what you need to do. So thank you so much for joining us today. And this recording will be available afterwards, and it will be on our Centre for Arts and Learning webpage. So if you want to go back to any of it, so to check out anything from the films or from Amanda's presentation. And thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate that. Thank you.